My name is Ganesh Natarajan. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Mindcrest. We are a legal services company, and we have four practice areas: litigation support, compliance, contracts management, and legal analytics. Uh, we heard earlier about delivering work of high quality, and delivering high quality work is sort of the reason we are in business, and we do it by bringing strong technology, strong process management and project management, and of course, great talent, which is what we've been talking about today. Bloomberg has been a very good partner for us for almost 10 years now. And we have helped develop some of the B Law products and help and support maintain some of the B Law products and the BNA products. They are a fantastic company. They are nimble, agile, and at the forefront of some of the disruption that's happening in the legal world. So we are certainly honored to be a sponsor today. When Wassily Leontief, the Nobel Prize winning economist, was asked, is technology going to replace workers? His answer was, it replaced horses, did it not? So what is the future of our profession? What will happen to our people? How do we take care of them, nurture them, and what is the effect to our bottom line, to revenues? Where is our legal profession going? Where is the practice of law going? Where is the business of law going? To answer all these questions and more, and to figure out what is the state of the legal industry, let me introduce you to David Levine, who is the General Counsel of Bloomberg, to kick off this session. Thank you again. David? Thanks.
Good morning. The title of this panel on the state of the legal industry is a bit ambitious for a 45-minute session, and we're not going to focus for too long on issues that will be addressed by other panels today or which have received so much attention that there's little which could be additionally contributed in such a short discussion. We are going to focus most deeply on an issue that is very seldom discussed, but in my view is critical to any discussion on the state of the industry, our people, and the challenges we face in attracting the best talent to the profession, how to train and develop that talent, and how to keep that talent engaged. I'd like to introduce our spectacular panel of three true leaders in the profession whose breadth of knowledge in our profession is beyond impressive. We're truly privileged to have each of them here with us today. Steve Gartner, who's seated in the middle, is chair of Willkie, Farr, and Gallagher, my former law firm, and is a longstanding member of the firm's executive committee. Steve is one of the leading corporate attorneys in the country with particular expertise in private equity and mergers and acquisitions. Steve has been with Willkie for more than 30 years. Seated immediately to my left is Kimberley Harris, who is Executive Vice President and General Counsel of NBCUniversal, a role she's held since 2013. Prior to joining NBC, Kim was a litigation partner at Davis Polk with a particular focus on governmental and congressional investigations. From 2010 to 2012, Kim served in the White House Counsel's office, most recently as Deputy Counsel and Deputy Assistant to the President. Seated all the way to the left is Bill Perlstein, to my left, your right, who has been the Senior Deputy General Counsel at BNY Mellon since June of 2015. Prior to joining BNY, Bill was at WilmerHale for approximately 40 years, give or take.
I couldn't get another job.
And was managing partner of the firm from 1998 through 2011. From 2004 through 2011, after Wilmer Cutler's merger with Hale & Dorr, really one of the more successful law firm mergers that we've seen in the last 2 decades. During his tenure at Wilmer, Bill led the firm's bankruptcy practice. So it's an interesting panel. I said, I am at a risk of offending at least one of you during the course of the panel today, and I apologize. Bill, and he reminded me after he made the move, has gone from being a firm that viewed us as a client to being a client of our company, and he certainly reminded me of that when I first saw him after our move. Steve is chair of Willkie, firm that I spent 12 and a half years at, and really our principal counsel in the United States. And of course, anytime you deal with a media organization, as we know, you always run the risk. Before we start the panel discussion, I'm going to make a series of personal observations about the industry and where it stands today. Some of these subjects will be directly or indirectly covered during the panel. Many will not, but I did want to tie it back to the title of the panel. And these are observations not in any particular order of importance. The first is, and this is something that will be covered a little bit later today, there has been a dramatic rise of in-house counsel over the past 5 or 10 years, which shows no signs of abating. The quality and sophistication of in-house legal functions, especially at large companies, are at an all-time high. And there's a lot of work that companies previously used outside counsel for that is now done entirely or mostly internally, or at the very least, which is actively managed internally. We are smarter at how to manage outside counsel today. We've taken work from outside counsel, and it's a trend that will continue, especially as more big law partners make the jump in-house. 3 of the panelists on today's panel are former big law partners who are currently in-house. And don't worry for Steve, he can defend himself in the middle perfectly well. Second, there's a greater in-house demand for senior firm lawyers versus junior firm lawyers. We're going to talk a little bit about the preference of in-house counsel to use more senior or experienced attorneys who are generally considered to be a better value than more junior lawyers, and the decreased reliance on junior big law attorneys given enhanced technology solutions, outsourcing, and more cost-effective alternatives for discovery, due diligence, and other types of work that have historically supported big law firms having a 5 or 6 associate to partner ratio, or the pyramid that's so often referred to. As we in-house general counsels demand less use of very junior attorneys and require more affordable outsourced solutions for some of the more rote or routine work, there will be less for junior law firm attorneys to do. One of the big questions is, will there be fewer of them? Will they need to specialize earlier in their careers in order to demonstrate that they add more value? Those are great unanswered questions. Something ultimately is going to give on big law profitability as the pyramid structure is under fire, unless firms are able to charge more for partner time to offset the push not to use junior lawyers as much on matters or find some other way to monetize their expertise. Just to be clear in this comment, because I know there are a number of firms that we use in the room today, I am not endorsing higher rates for partners by that comment. They are high enough. I'm just merely making the observation that that could be one way of maintaining profitability. I do see firm expenses going up at a higher clip than revenue, and there will be a panel later today on cybersecurity. That's largely a sunk cost for firms because they're not going to be able to pass that along to clients very easily. On the issue of associate pay, everyone will have seen Cravat's recent announcement. My gut reaction was almost identical to the reaction of Craig Silliman, who's the general counsel of Verizon, who was quoted in a story written by BNA's Casey Sullivan, who spoke earlier. And Craig, I'm going to read his quote because it was exactly my reaction. To the degree that law firms are reallocating their profits by giving first-year associates higher salaries, then this is about their internal business model, and it doesn't affect me. We don't pay for the first-year associate work, but to the degree that the firms are raising salaries across the board and they try to push through these pay increases in higher billing rates, that it simply encourages me to look for alternatives, whether moving the work in-house or moving work to lower price firms. Very succinctly put, and now these are my words, we won't pay for it. In-house budgets for outside counsel spend are going up. In some cases, aren't going up. In some cases, they're going down. So the notion of annual increases in the rate card, which has typically been accepted, is very much in jeopardy. So The big question that we're not going to spend a ton of time talking about today, because there's going to be a lot of publicity, we'll talk about it a little, is does this mean the billable hour will eventually die? Of course, this is something that's been forecasted probably for two decades. It won't completely die, of course, because there will be matters where it makes sense, but we do expect a major shift in how legal services are sold. And for the first time, really, I think legal expenses are being scrutinized like the law is a business. And given the trends we've discussed, this is only going to intensify. Third observation is that as a profession, we have a terrible record on diversity, and it's a big problem. Many of you will have seen the statistics. Certainly, there are no shortage of women entering the profession. Yet, for the past decades, few strides have been made at big law firms in promoting women to the equity partner role. And pay for women continues to lag in the profession. Further on diversity, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, law is one of the least racially diverse professions in the nation. 88% of lawyers are white. If you compare that with the medical field, the number is around 72% of physicians and surgeons. The numbers are not great, just as they're not great for women in terms of promotion of minorities to the equity partnership ranks at big law firms. Maybe in-house counsel will be able to do something to push firms, and Bill and Kim are going to talk a little bit about this, but our profession overall has a big problem, including the pipeline issue, and I believe we need to do something a lot bigger than individual D&I programs and in-house counsel putting pressure on law firms to deal with the issue. Fourth, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, and Brad touched on this, big law partnership isn't what it used to be. Certainly, it's still pretty good, and I think the four of us can talk to that, but it's changed a lot. We don't see as many people who stay partners at firms for as long. I think there's a bit more economic free agency, both by the firms and by the partners. Fifth, work-life balance matters to everyone, not just women, and the legal industry has to and is adjusting, but we've done nowhere near enough. And last, and this is the first topic we're going to discuss as a panel, the legal profession is not hot with college grads. And this is a point that I believe Matt touched on in his questions with Brad. We're seeing what at the very least can be characterized as a correction in the level of interest in joining the profession during the past decade, whereas many other professions, including engineering, medicine, and even business, seem to be gaining in interest. Applications are down, even at the nation's top law schools. The bar passage rates are down, and other professions are doing something when they see issues in terms of interest. We've seen banks who are concerned about losing grads to technology firms trying to address the issue in terms of reputation and the way they promote their organizations. We're seeing very little in the practice of law. I don't know how big the issue is. Maybe it's a trend that will die shortly, but irrespective, certainly it's my view that we need to do more. So with that said, I think the first question and where we want to start with as a macro point is we are seeing a significant decline in interest among young people in the profession. And I guess my first question for the panel is, do you see this as a problem? And we'll start with Bill.
Look, I've been around this long enough to have seen the cycles up and down, David, in terms of the popularity of law. Certainly when I left Union College, I'll put a plug in for Union College. Brad Karp, David, and I are all Union grads. That's basically why we're all here. In 1970, law wasn't that big a deal, and there were lots of different things people could do. I think it is related to some degree to a lot of what Brad was talking about, which is the demands, particularly on the private side, are 24/7. There are good and bad things about the technology. As my wife will recount, we canceled 2/3 of our vacations when I was coming up through the ranks, because if you weren't in the office, you couldn't practice law. So now we all go with our BlackBerries and computers and people complain about it, but at least you're going and you're able to be there. So I think part of it is a cycle. On the diversity issue, which I know we're going to talk about more in detail, that is a massive issue that is beyond the ability of the law firms and in-house counsel to deal with themselves. But I do agree very much with what Brad said, which is we really do need to take a leadership role. Frankly, look around this room, and it's got to be 95% white. And this is 2016, and there really is a continuing massive issue that really goes back to my former partner, John Payton's view, which is it really starts in the local schools. And so on Brad's point about partnering, every one of us can partner with a local school and bring the kids in, talk to them about what it is, tell them to have a shot of in fact being able to succeed in a profession. We can really make a difference, but it really takes a real concentrated effort to do it.
Steve?
Well, on the question of the decline in law students, I think the law schools are really feeling the pressure today. Perhaps not the cream of the crop law schools yet, but the second and third tier schools are really under strain, and it's a financial strain, and they're challenged with whether this is a short-term blip or a trend that they have to worry about on a longer-term basis. I don't know the answer to that. I think from big law's perspective, we really haven't seen the impact of that yet. We still have a pool of talent that we can tap at the top law schools and at the second and third tier law schools where we've recruited at Willkie for years. We probably have 50 law schools represented among our population. We can get the top people at those law schools. And for us, if there was an impact, and we haven't seen it yet, the first thing we would probably do is broaden the number of schools that we're approaching. And then the other alternative is to dip down lower into the classes at the various law schools. So I think for us, it's going to be, it would have to be a long-term and sustained trend before it had an impact on our hiring.
Yeah, I think that decline in law school students is a problem if we're not getting the best and the brightest into the profession, and if that decline has a disproportionate impact on diversity. I don't know what the statistics are, but I think that's going to be a serious issue for the profession if fewer people are choosing to go to law school, entering the profession, and that means that we're getting even fewer diverse lawyers into the profession, and we're going to really have to keep an eye on that. I agree, it's going to be a critical issue. We, too, haven't seen a problem recruiting really high-quality talent yet, but if it is a long-term trend, there's going to be tremendous competition for the best and the brightest, so I think that the industry really is going to have to come to grips with how to make the profession sexy and interesting again.
So a question for all of our panelists, again, and we'll start with you, Kim. What do you say to college students or recent college grads who ask you, and I'm sure many do, about the practice of law and whether they should go to law school?
Well, look, I think collegial education is a great thing. You can do a lot with it. You don't need to go into big law. That's only one possible professional choice. So I think it's a great thing to do. However, I do counsel people not to do it at all costs. Because I think that there is a real challenge for people who come out of law school with a tremendous amount of debt and can't find a job and can't pay it off and are starting their professional life really challenged in terms of the financial aspects of a legal career. So I think people have to really be careful that they don't go to law school, incur $100,000 in debt with no way to pay it off.
And what skills do you think, and my sense is this has evolved over the last 20 or 25 years, what skills do you think somebody needs to have to be a successful attorney today?
Certainly from the in-house perspective, adaptability. I think that is one of the biggest skills that young lawyers need to develop. We in the media industry are challenged by the rapidly changing landscape in terms of the digital revolution or evolution. And I think it's critical that we have lawyers who can adapt, can really keep pace with changes in the business, changes in the law. Creative thinking, I think, is something particularly in our industry that is really important for our legal staff to have. So that would be the one skill that I think is important to develop.
And Steve, both questions for you as well.
Well, as to the second question, I think today the skill set has really changed from where it was when I joined the profession, and the words that you would use today probably weren't even on the horizon back then. Today, I think you have to be a good problem solver. I think you have to be able to work collaboratively. You know, whether it's in-house or at a law firm, there's team projects. I think you have to have a passion about immersing yourself in the business of your client and really understanding your client's business. And I think you have to be adept technologically. And those are completely different or new skills that probably weren't on the horizon when I started practicing law. In terms of what you tell the young people today, I have 4 kids, none of them's a lawyer. I think that's probably more a reflection of my advocacy skills. I love being a lawyer, and I tell people that. I really like what I'm doing. You have to have some passion for what you're doing. If you're doing this because you're attracted to the money, that's a terrible reason. If you're doing it because you're going to law school because you have nothing better to do for the next 3 years, that's a terrible reason. You really have to have a genuine interest in what we do as counselors and as advocates and as problem solvers for our clients. And if those skill sets don't interest you, this is not a stopping off point until you find something better to do. I think, you know, given the debt burdens that the students come out, the challenges they have in finding jobs that can either satisfy their debt or satisfy them intellectually, that's a bad strategy if that's the reason you're going to law school today.
And Bill?
Yeah, and just to echo a couple of points that both my colleagues have made, and to reinforce what Brad said to his daughter, if you are not enthusiastic about doing this, don't do it. That seems to me to be it used to be, as Kim said, you went to law school, so you had, you know, it was a good ticket to something else. At $150,000 worth of debt and the selectivity that we all have in hiring, that doesn't work anymore. The reason, and I'll put a plug in for Brad Karp is the single best client service person I've ever met in my entire life. And he did that with the enthusiasm and the sense for every single client that they mattered more than anybody else. And that made a difference. When I was at Wilmer, he was my lawyer, still my lawyer. And it's, you know, the quality is terrific, but it's that dedication that makes a difference. You can't fake that, and you certainly can't do it for 30 or 40 years. So if somebody doesn't have that level of enthusiasm, nobody's going to have Brad's, but close to it, you know, then go on and do something else. The other point Steve made, teamwork. At law school, teamwork is considered to be the moot court partner you're competing with, and that is teamwork. When you go to business school, you go to, my son is getting his master's in computer science at Stanford. It's all team projects. You come to a law firm and you're put on a team and you have no idea what to do. That's the reason that at Wilmer we hired a lot of people who did intercollegiate sports, because if you did that, you understood what your role was. You understood, particularly if you started off as a freshman, that you weren't necessarily going to be running the place your first year. It's really critical to look for the people who you think are going to be good team players. It's not enough anymore just to be smart. That used to be enough. That's a necessary quality to be analytical, but to be able to work in a team, be able to take orders and ultimately give orders is really critical.
That's a very good segue to the next topic, which is discussing the millennial generation, which is increasingly coming into our ranks. And at least my experience is it's a generation which tends to move more from job to job relatively quickly and seemingly with little concern about how that might impact their resume. And I guess from an in-house perspective, I'd like Kim's view on how that looks when you've seen somebody who's been in 3 jobs in 6 years. And it's sort of a second question there is what can be done to actually hold on to the younger talent for longer in-house. And I know we don't tend to hire as many people who are fresh out of law school, but we still get people who are 3, 4, 5 years out.
Yeah. I think it depends. I always do pause when I see a resume where people have jumped around a lot because you got to wonder why. But if the reason is that somebody has a good explanation and the reason is because They wanted a new challenge. They wanted to learn a new skill. They wanted to advance their development in a very smart and strategic way. I actually don't have a problem with that. And I like that. I like people who are really thinking about wanting to make themselves better professionals by developing experience and skills. And sometimes you need to have different roles to do that. Of course, if it reflects a wanderlust that somebody isn't really committed, that's going to be a problem for me in terms of bringing somebody in-house. But we do not hire younger lawyers. We tend to, I think the youngest we tend to hire is sort of 5 or 6 years out. And we work really hard right now on how to keep them engaged. The ability to have people move into new roles is harder to do in-house because there's just less upward mobility. People tend to stay in roles for a lot longer, and there isn't the automatic progression in seniority that you get in a law firm environment. But we've done a lot of programs to try to help people, what we call develop in place, that even if they aren't getting that next title or that next role, that we're working on finding them discrete projects where they can take leadership, learn management skills. We're doing a lot of internal training with people so that they continue to feel engaged. And we're trying to draw from our millennials some creative thinking that some of the lawyers who've been at the company for 10, 15, 20 years aren't as adept at, and really get them to challenge some of our original assumptions of why do we need to have a 30-page contract? Perhaps it could be 5 or 10 pages, and trying to get them to feel ownership over those kinds of things, raise those questions, and feel like they're really contributing to our common endeavor.
If you could talk for a minute, if you've experienced it, on so what is particularly important to some of the younger lawyers that you've seen in-house? Flexibility, the desire to feel like they're constantly moving forward, and a little bit about your experience in terms of the things that you're hearing from the younger generation about what matters most to them.
I think the thing I hear the most is that they want to have the work that they're doing be meaningful, and they want to have meaningful responsibility. And so we're trying to figure out ways, everybody needs more junior people who just help the cogs continue to move. But we are trying to figure out ways that we can help people understand why what they're doing is meaningful and how it connects to the broader purpose of the company, why it's an important part of the success that the company has had. Because I think that's something that this generation seems to really want to feel, that they are meaningful.
I'd like to draw a little bit of a distinction here. In-house, and we'll talk about retention in a minute, when we lose attorneys, feel a great deal of pain, particularly when they've learned a lot about our business and have developed very strong working relationships with the business, and the cost of replacement is very high. And so when we set targets for the year, one of our targets in our business plan is to achieve a certain level of retention, particularly among the attorneys in our department. The law firm model is a bit different for younger people. And so Steve, maybe you could talk a little bit about the law firm mentality and what law firms are trying to do or not trying to do to try and keep some of the younger people around for longer.
Well, it is a different model because it's a pyramid structure with historically an up and out model that assumes that a large percentage of the people who start are not going to be here at some point in the future. And the $64,000 question is, what's that point in the future? And the longer the better for the law firm, and also I think for the law students. So we are now much more focused on trying to retain people longer in the system, whereas I think earlier, certainly in my career, there was a relative indifference to how many people left early in the cycle. Today, it's a failure for us, I think, if someone's leaving before their 4th year, in part because we've made a huge investment in them, and in part because I don't think they got the full value of what we had to offer to them. And when we have a much more open dialogue with our associates about that they ought to walk away from a law firm with strong mentoring relationships, with strong relationships with partners that are going to continue for the extent of their career. If they're not walking away with those relationships because they've only been there for 1 or 2 years, they didn't get the benefit of the bargain from their perspective. So what are we doing about it? When I started working at Willkie, the bargain for the lawyer was, we'll make you a great lawyer and we'll give you interesting work. Put your head down and look up 6 years from now and you'll be a great lawyer who's done a lot of good work. That doesn't work anymore. So the associates are looking for a lot more communication, a lot more dialogue about where their career is going, what their options are, We now have programs with third-party providers that provide career counseling, so our associates can go speak to a career counselor because they don't want to walk into a partner's office and say, hey, I'm thinking about doing something else. Can we compare some notes on that? We have an open dialogue with the executives in the firm. I regularly have open forums with the junior associates, the mid-level associates, and the senior associates to hear what's on their mind, to try and talk to them about what's going on both in the profession and at the firm. There's a much more open dialogue with the associates because they are looking for information, they're looking for feedback, they're looking for direction on where their career is going and where it can go.
So I want to pivot to more senior lawyers here, Steve, and stay with you. Given the relatively small percentage of associates who were promoted, particularly to the equity partner ranks, how do you keep talented individuals around for long enough? Those who truly possess, in your mind, the ability, as much as this can be judged after 3 or 4 years or 5 years, to make it to that stage?
Well, the model's under attack in some ways because, from the junior associate perspective, as I was just saying about not wanting to lose them too early, the discussion we want to have with our associates is let's get you to a point in your career where we can have a meaningful dialogue about whether you're going to become a partner at this firm or a client of this firm. And I can't do that in your second year. Maybe I can do it in your 5th year. If I can't get you to that point where we can have a meaningful dialogue, we've both failed from my perspective. But what are we doing for the senior associates? First, we make a lot of partners. Willkie is committed to providing opportunities for organic growth. And we've told our associates we're going to put our money where our mouth is. We've made 23 partners internally in the last 3 years. That's a lot. And I think if you lined us up on a percentage basis for our peer firms, it's probably at the top of the charts. And we do that in part because we want to be able to say to our associates, if you want to be a partner here, and not everybody does, but if you want to be a partner here, and you're committed, and you have the talent, there is a real opportunity for partnership growth here. We've all seen the growth of other titled positions, whether it's counsel or non-equity partnership tracks. We have a lot more counsel than we did 10 years ago. Part of that is, to your earlier point, David, clients want more senior attention. They don't want to see the junior lawyers. They want more senior lawyers, and they want more specialized lawyers. So you have to have those skill sets. And if you don't have those skill sets, you're not going to be able to provide the service to the clients. And not all of those skill sets are necessarily amenable to equity partnership, but you have to have those skill sets. So we have to be more flexible, and the model's going to require more flexibility if this is going to meet the needs of the clients as the clients become more demanding and request more specialization, and as the associates look for more opportunities to do work in the law firms, recognizing that not everybody can necessarily be an equity partner.
And I think to some extent there are parallels with the in-house environment as well, because although there isn't a concept of equity partnership in-house, there are a relatively limited number of what are perceived as very senior positions within a legal department. And since we have a tremendous amount of retention, those spots don't become available for too long. And for people who are looking for more managerial responsibility, we have similar challenges. And Bill, I was wondering, given your experience both at Wilmer and now at BNY, if you could talk a little bit about what you've observed in the last year plus at BNY and compare that a little bit with your experience at Wilmer in terms of the efforts to retain people who now have significant experience and have options available to them.
And I think that there's more of a parallel between the two, David, than I certainly would have imagined before I went in-house. And it partly goes back to what Steve was saying a few minutes ago. One of the skill sets that you have to start developing when you're certainly at a counsel level, when you're at a law firm and then when you go in-house, is the personnel management. And a lot of the retention issues, whether it's at the mid-level, associate level, at the law firm, more senior levels of the law firm, or in-house, is the more senior people paying attention to the individuals. People leave because they feel that they're stagnating. They think that they're stagnating because nobody's worrying about their career. Somebody comes, one of the headhunters, many of whom are here today, will come and say to them, you've been identified by a potential client as a real star. They just take a meeting with them, and all of a sudden somebody's paying attention to them, and they get lured by it. Our job, whether it's at a law firm or in-house, is to be paying that attention to our people today so that when somebody makes a phone call, they don't even want to take the meeting. So a lot of it is it's really retail. It is, as Brad was saying earlier, vis-a-vis his management at Paul Weiss, it is understanding the individuals, figuring out whether they're in-house or at a law firm, what do they need to do to move up a level. In-house, one of the issues is, can you place them in the businesses? Because a lot of the lawyers in-house are as interested in moving over to the business side, or at least the quasi-business side. So there it's a matter of meeting with your business leaders and saying, so-and-so who is your lawyer, is there an opportunity for him or her to get more business responsibility, and that way you keep them in and they see a way of moving up and getting onto the revenue side rather than the business partner side, and being on the revenue side is a good place. But I really do think it is very retail, and I think that most lawyers don't view that as their job. They view their job solving legal problems. Well, solving the personnel problem today is just as important as solving the legal problem.
So a bit of a segue there to managerial skills, and an observation that I had being at a firm for 12 and a half years and now being in-house for 4.5 years, which is, and back to some of the earlier comments, which is law school is a very individual effort, which isn't to say that there aren't team study groups or team efforts, but it's a very individual effort. I'd like Steve's view a little bit on what, if anything, law firms do once a fresh associate comes in to teach them as they grow and ultimately are working in teams, how to work and help manage, essentially, a more junior lawyer's career, or is it very much the firm's responsibility?
So I think if the clients were hiring our lawyers and measuring whether we did a good job in teaching those lawyers to be good managers, we probably fail. We get a failing grade. If they're measuring us on whether we taught those people to be good lawyers, hopefully we get a good grade. I think if I think about that, certainly in their junior years, they're being told, focus on becoming a great lawyer. As they progress from junior associate to senior associate, we're more concerned about the transition because they're then in a position to be delegating. And so our focal point then becomes continue to become a good lawyer, but learn how to delegate, learn how to work with junior associates, learn when something should be off your plate and on a junior associate's plate, and how to work with those teams. But that's not the full skill set that you need, David, when you come in and become a general counsel, because one of the things that we're not doing is teaching those people, okay, well, when your team comes to you and says, well, where's my career going? Where's my career path? That's not a skill set we're promoting. We are promoting that more at the partner level. That becomes much more important at the partner level, and we're spending more time and resources on getting the partners trained and improving that skill set, because that is a conversation that's had with the associates and with the partners. But if the clients were measuring us on the basis of hiring a fifth-year associate and seeing whether that associate had managerial skill, my guess is most law firms get a D.
And some of that, I think, comes back to the issue of retention, which is at the junior ranks at the firm, there's an expectation of a certain level of turnover, and it's very much on the person to figure out if this is something that they want to stick at for a period of time. Whereas in-house, as I alluded to earlier, when you have high levels of attrition, it doesn't work. So what we find is people who've spent large chunks of their career at a firm and who come in-house don't necessarily have the mindset of, oh, I need to work hard to try and keep my teammates engaged and help them with their career progression. And Kim, maybe you can talk a little bit about your experience, what you've observed, and what you're trying to do to help develop those managerial skills at NBC.
Yeah, I agree 100% that law firms don't train people to be managers and probably shouldn't, but we absolutely have to do it when they become in-house lawyers. One of my observations over the course of the last 3 years has been that I have fantastic lawyers, but some of them didn't have the basic skills in how to manage a team because nobody had ever taught them. It was no fault of their own, but they'd never been put in a situation where managerial skills were actually something that they were being evaluated on. So what we've done is we've actually created a new management training program for all of our lawyers in the legal department. So anybody with more than one report now has to go through a program that we call LEAD, which is a 3-day, somewhat intensive program where they learn sort of the basics about management and then sort of a higher level class on management all in one course. And we're getting everybody through that, and then it'll become mandatory as you get to a level within the department that you need to have more than one report. And it's basic things from how you have the tough conversations in terms of a performance review, so that you actually are helping people develop, that people most often appreciate an honest, straightforward conversation about where their professional development needs are, but you need to teach people how to have that conversation, and also how to really keep your team engaged. Going back to some of our earlier themes about people who are moving more frequently in the millennial generation, part of that and part of the strategy to prevent that is for people to understand how you keep your team engaged, how you figure out what their highest skills are, how you play to their highest skills, how do you figure out what their development needs are, provide them with meaningful opportunities to work on those development needs, and overall feel connected to the company and excited about the prospect of the work that they're doing.
I guess one thing that I would add to that, really, for lawyers who have decided a few years into their legal career at a firm that they want to go in-house, look for leadership opportunities outside of the firm. There are many that are there, and I found, at least for me, what I learned about leadership, most of it was not at the firm. It's things that I did before I was at the firm or outside of the firm, and those opportunities are there, and that will make you that much more effective when you actually go in-house and those responsibilities are called upon, particularly at a senior level.
Agree completely. And one of the things that for people who are looking for leadership or management opportunities in our legal department but don't have that opportunity because of our structure, we have a number of department-wide committees. We have a diversity committee, a professional development committee, a communications committee, and we encourage people to take part in those committees as an opportunity to take on a project, to show some leadership, to have the ability to have good ideas be implemented, and it's another way of keeping people developed and learn some of those skills outside of their regular work.
Yeah, and I think even beyond those sort of legal committees, I think it's important that those of us at the senior levels look to see where we have lawyers on operating committees and other committees like that, and make sure that the tendency is to put the same people on the committees and to forget about some of the younger people, and those are great opportunities for them to get exposure to the business people and also to see how the senior management operates.
Yep.
So one final question that I'm going to ask the panel, and a lot of this, derives from my earlier comments around technology and lower cost solutions. Do we think ultimately that the billable hour, and I'd like each of the panelists' thoughts on this, that the billable hour is going to be degraded substantially as a means for valuing services that law firms provide, or at least charging? And Bill, we'll start with you.
Look, I don't think it's going away. We are all looking for ways to get more discipline. So whether it's fixed fee matters, whether it is collars, whether it is more budgeting at different stages, the time where you could, where just simply doing good quality work and the cost of matter is well past. But it is still the measure for the vast percentage of the work. I think it's 15 or 20% is now alternative. It could go to a third. I don't think it's going away, but it still ends up being the baseline that people are using to then come up with whatever the fixed fee is. Let me put on two other quick plugs since I know we're running out of time. One, and this is just my year being on the inside. The law firms assume that we know way too much about what you do. You think you're bothering us when you're giving us phone calls or quick emails. You're not bothering us. Don't assume that we know what's going on. The quick one-page note about have you seen this is invaluable. We really do care about it. So keep that stuff up. Two,
as long as you don't get charged for that.
No, exactly. We're not getting charged. Two, secondments. I do not understand why law firm managers resist secondments. It is the best way to embed a relationship We need help. We've got people out on leaves. We have projects that come in. When we ask you for a secondment and you say no, you are doing massive damage to the relationship. The vice versa is you put somebody with us for 3 or 6 months, they develop invaluable relationships. They may end up coming in-house. The best thing you can do is place somebody with us, then they are a client for the next 20 years. But the reluctance that I see, and I saw it when I was at Wilmer with other law firms because we did a lot of it, and I still see it at the bank, I frankly don't understand what you're doing.
It's much more common in Europe than it is in the United States. And on this point, the final comment for Steve on the billable hour.
Look, I think we've read in the paper for years that the billable hour is dying. I think there's less actual evidence of that. It's still a small percentage of our revenue that's done in the alternative fee arrangements. It's probably under 10% today. What I would say, maybe to Brad's point about value, is that the clients are getting much more disciplined and sophisticated, including with their own algorithms about what something should cost. And so regardless of what the billable hour is or how many hours are on the matter, we're having many more conversations with our clients at the end of the matter or during the matter, at the beginning of the matter, as to what should this cost. And if the client says, well, we think this should cost about $500,000 for this, and it comes in at $750,000, the clients don't care about how many hours you work. They don't care about what your actual rate was. Was it $1,300 or $1,200? What they care about is, look, we had a view, and it's based on some pretty sophisticated data, that you guys are 50% over cost. And I think that discussion is going to drive us more away from the billable hour than anything else, because the clients and we are both getting much more sophisticated about the total value proposition for particular matters.
And certainty really matters, particularly when you're on a budget, as we are. Well, I'd like to thank the panel. I'm conscious that we're over time, so probably don't have time for questions from the audience. But thanks very much to Bill, Steve, and Kim.